Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 3rd, 2021, and in less than a month, we will find out who the next governor of Virginia will be, whether it be the Democratic nominee Terry McAuliffe or the Republican nominee Glenn Youngkin. Now, in today's polling numbers, we have seen the race narrow up in a pretty significant way. Terry McAuliffe started out with a pretty large lead over Glenn Youngkin, a 7-point lead back in August of 2021, enough so that it maintained to be a pretty high amount up until recently. As of September 22nd through September 29th, the numbers had remained around 3-4% in terms of the lead for Terry McAuliffe. Now, the reason why that is at all notable is because it is a downfall from where Joe Biden was in the 2020 presidential election. The bar is set high for Democrats in the state of Virginia, given that the most recent gubernatorial race went to the Democrats by a margin of 9 points, and the presidential race went to a margin by over 10 points. In addition, intermittent Senate elections and the 2020 Senate election, Mark Warner won by a very similar margin to Joe Biden in the Virginia race in the Senate. In addition, in 2018, Tim Kaine won that Senate race by over 15 points. So when you take a look at the state of Virginia, all expectations are that Democrats will perform well. Like I just said, the Senate race here was decided by a margin of 12 points for the Democratic nominee. As much as Virginia is long stood as a swing state, it certainly has had some very significant victories for Democrats, with them reclaiming control of both the House of Delegates and the state Senate as recently as 2019. So when these new numbers come out showing that Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe are within a very close race, a 3-point race, that is why it was so significant. It was the narrowest the race had been during the entirety of the campaign season, but now, based off new polling numbers, they seem to be moving away from each other yet again. In fact, Terry McAuliffe takes the highest point he's ever had according to the Real Clear Politics average, with a 48.3% of the vote based off these polling numbers. Now, will this race be a 5-point margin of victory? To be completely honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. It is very possible that it is a 5-point victory. It's very possible that it's larger than a 5-point victory, but it could always be closer, and with the margin of error here is 3.5%, so it could be from anywhere between 1.5% in terms of the victory for Terry McAuliffe or a victory of 8.5%. But the point being that the margin of error is no longer large enough to a point where Glenn Youngkin could actually win this race. Of course, more significant polling errors have occurred as recently as 2020 and 2016, but Virginia might hold some interesting results, and if you take a look at the swing from 2013 and 2017, none of it shows that a Republican can actually win in this state at this point in time, but of course, it is very possible. I'm not going to dispel it just because of some of these polls, but it is worth covering, noting that Terry McAuliffe is back on the up and up when it comes down to this race. And I don't really see it having to do much with President Biden's approval rating. President Biden's approval rating is at 45%. 45% was his low point back on September 6th, and it is his low point today. Now, the approval rating has gotten a little bit closer. Only 3.7% more of Americans disapprove of him than they do approve of him. That's better from where it was in some other times. When you take a look at that lower point, it was 4.1% versus 3.7%. Not a super significant shift, but in very close races, which Virginia might end up being, a few thousand votes can certainly sway an entire election and will shape the governorship for the next 4 years if it does come down to that margin. So everything really does matter, but I won't say that I am seeing this bump for Terry McAuliffe simply because of Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is remaining exactly where he was at the start of a lot of these polls starting to be released, so I can't exactly say that this is related to any type of situation in Virginia or not, and I think we should go beyond just the simple Joe Biden approved of, Joe Biden disapproved of, and talk about why this might be. So recently, the final gubernatorial debate, I realize we're not in the presidential time period, in which Glenn Youngkin was really slammed by many of these questions. Not to say that Terry McAuliffe wasn't, but Glenn Youngkin in many ways was playing defense versus Terry McAuliffe, who was mostly playing offense. The thing is, Glenn Youngkin has been caught up in a couple of issues here, in terms of Donald Trump, in terms of the vaccine, and in terms of abortion. I'll go through those really quickly. First things first, Glenn Youngkin has been trying to push himself away from President Trump as much as he can. He knows that President Trump lost the state of Virginia by 10.1% in the 2020 election, and he does not want to repeat that. He's gone so far as to campaign with Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, but refuses to invite Donald Trump to the state out of fear that he will end up weighing him down. That is the situation, but he says on the national mainstream media that he wholeheartedly accepts this endorsement, and President Trump consistently releasing statements doesn't help him. Because when Glenn Youngkin is out here trying to push away Donald Trump, then having to go on to Fox News and Newsmax and all these other sources and say, I accept the endorsement of Donald Trump, it makes him seem a little hypocritical to many of these voters that are vehemently anti-Trump, but willing to consider voting for a Republican. The same thing that we have to do with abortions and vaccines. There is a private position and there is a public position. For Glenn Youngkin, he has been unapologetically pro-life. He has been very clear about that, and he said that at the debate, that he is pro-life with very few exceptions. But when he was speaking to someone one-on-one, this was reported by some type of hot mic situation or a recording in which he did not know about. Regardless, it was a private position in which Glenn Youngkin was confiding in someone, trusting them with this information, saying that once Republicans, and I'm assuming he's just saying this because it's sort of the way politicians say, once I'm in the White House, once I'm in the Senate. So he said once Republicans win the state legislature, meaning the House of Delegates here, and eventually win the state Senate in 2023, with him in the governor's office, they will go on the offense against abortion, meaning passing laws that would restrict and prohibit abortions the same way you are seeing it happen in Texas, the same way you're seeing it happen in Mississippi. Even though Roe v. Wade has been a long-standing thing for decades now, nearly half a century, you are also in this position where there are Republicans out there, including Glenn Youngkin, who privately will take this position that they are willing to go on the offense. And the reason why that was a center of contention is because this is not what is expected of a Republican in Virginia. It might be expected of a Republican in states such as Texas or West Virginia or North Carolina, but it is not in the state of Virginia. And that was something that was hurting him. And this article specifically is about the vaccine question, in which the moderator asked, what is the difference between the vaccines for measles, the difference between the vaccine for other things, but why is COVID-19? Why is there a difference there in terms of mandating one vaccine but not the other? And then he responds saying, the data associated with those vaccines is something that we should be absolutely understand the difference between this vaccine. Pretty much saying that they are not the same and that one has been long-lastedly studying, but this one hasn't been, and people are concerned about it. People are upset about this answer. Mostly people on the Democratic side. In fact, the majority of Virginians are fully vaccinated. So when you have a portion of the population that entirely trusts the vaccine, and you have a nominee for a statewide position saying that they don't think that it is okay to mandate them, that they don't think that it is something that should be discussed or something that should be pushed onto by the state government, I understand the issue of the question of whether or not something should be mandated or not. But if they're mandating certain vaccines and you can't find an accurate way to say that there is a reason for a difference here in terms of mandating one versus the other without resorting to, and he did resort to this, without resorting to that standard right-wing talking point about the vaccine, maybe not necessarily giving us all the information, we don't know the long-term effects, that's sort of what he was alluding to. And that's why voters are upset with a question such as this, and may be a reason why there seems to be a slight uptick in support for Terry McAuliffe. Because in every regard, this is Terry McAuliffe's race to lose. Glenn Youngkin was in this position where he certainly could have won the race. And maybe in the final stretch of this last less than a month, he can possibly win the governor election. But it was always going to be Terry McAuliffe's race. It was on Glenn Youngkin to do everything perfectly in order to win in this race. Because Virginia, to be completely honest with you, is no longer a swing state. It may be in terms of this election, but in terms of every other aspect, really is not. And needs to be treated as a state that leans towards the Democratic Party, which is why Glenn Youngkin needed to be careful. And he simply failed to do that. It's not something that I'm going to say is only for the Republican Party. I'm just saying that Terry McAuliffe can afford to screw up versus Glenn Youngkin, who clearly cannot. Because whenever he says one thing that might be a standard GOP talking point, it will be scrutinized to the fullest extent by the media, by members of the Democratic Party, and it works effectively because Virginia is not Florida. Virginia is not Wisconsin. It's not a state that was decided within a few percentage points. It was a 10.1% margin of victory for the Democratic Party. And Northern Virginia is only getting larger. It makes it increasingly more difficult for Glenn Youngkin to win. And the fact that he won't adapt and won't change his own views, and I understand it's disingenuous, but politics is all about optics. Glenn Youngkin can hold as conservative the views as he wants, but when these things started to release, the questions of the vaccine sprung. The questions of abortion sprung. And when Donald Trump couldn't keep his mouth shut to not endorse Glenn Youngkin in a full-on regard, I mean, after the primary, sure, but that was always going to get attention, and regardless if Trump had endorsed Youngkin or not, he would have been tied to him, but not to the same extent. Because when you have clips of Glenn Youngkin saying he wholeheartedly accepts his endorsement, when you have President Trump sending out statements saying that Glenn Youngkin will make Virginia great again, what do you think that does to the voters that rejected President Trump by a landslide type of margin for a state that used to be as conservative as Virginia? I'm not saying it's a landslide by regular margin, but when you take a look at Virginia's electoral history, you might question it. So, looking back though, I mentioned this earlier on in the video, that polling data within that margin of error might end up being something that's beneficial for Glenn Youngkin, and that is completely true. But I would warn him. In 2017, the polling numbers seemed to underestimate the Democratic Party. But in 2013, they overestimated the Democratic Party. The swing from 2013 between the RCP average and the final result was 4.2%. Before, if you had adjusted that based off the numbers back in end of September, it was 2.8%. If you swung it by a similar margin, you would have seen the Republican win in this state. But a 5-point margin makes it so if you swing it by 4.2%, Terry McAuliffe still wins in the race. Now, it's not an exact science. It's not always going to be the same type of swing, and it really just depends on the circumstances of the year. People could have expected 2013 to be less competitive than 2017, and of course they went in opposite directions. It was a toss-up race by RCP, and I'm sure this one was a toss-up race as well, but the polling data definitely put it in the lean column versus this one, I would say, also could maybe be in the lean column, but definitely more competitive than a margin of 6.7% statewide. But the thing is, Terry McAuliffe broke history in 2013. Maybe that's why the race was narrowed up. Maybe we can make that type of determination based off of it. If you take a look at every single election in the first year of a president's term, you will see that Virginia has always voted against the opposite way, meaning that the incumbent party never won their election with the president in office until 2013, when Terry McAuliffe made history and won by 2.5% statewide in the state of Virginia. Even though New Jersey, a very much Democratic state, much more Democratic state than Virginia, went to Chris Christie by 22%, a Republican in that state. So you can see here that Virginia made history in 2013, but beyond that, we are expecting it to still be a more competitive state than it was on the presidential level. But what we're looking at here in terms of these polls, sure, it is more competitive, but at the end of the day, if Democrats get a 4-year term, they get a 4-year term. If they are able to win here, it means that there was no type of super surge for the GOP in terms of their support. The way that we saw a number of special elections narrow up in 2017 is not what we're seeing happening here in 2021. The Republican Party could absolutely spin a moral victory out of this race and try to say that if we organize harder, if we work in more competitive states than Virginia, we have a chance at victory, which would be absolutely true, but it would work less than a Republican winning in Virginia, the same way that the California recall election did not go their way. But in 2017, Democrats won a Senate election and made the balance of power 51-49. So certain things were much bigger in terms of implication in 2017, and Democrats blew the Republicans out of the water in both New Jersey and Virginia. And then you take a look at 2021, and it's been pretty much lackluster for the GOP in almost every regard, with very few exceptions. I don't find it to be something that could be at all comparable to 2017, but we will see what happens following this Virginia race, because it could be an upset, and it would be an upset, considering this 5-point spread across the race. But, looking at what is happening here with Glenn Youngkin and the Republican Party, I think it also may be attributed to the fact that they are trying to hit on social issues that simply are not popular amongst the party here. The Virginia race has Republicans, quote, dreaming of a post-Trump future. And people are saying that, Glenn Youngkin as a mini Trump hasn't dampened GOP enthusiasm according to polls. Well, if it was truly a standard race between a Democrat and Republican in Virginia, sure, the Democrats would have the upper hand as they do right now. But I do think that the Trump rhetoric might be a little effective. You have to understand that these voters in Virginia used to be way more competitive than they are now. And the one person that ultimately shifted the state to the left was Donald Trump. It wasn't Hillary Clinton. It wasn't Tim Kaine. It wasn't Joe Biden. It was simply Donald Trump being on this ballot for a second time, and these voters pushed away from him in a way that we had not seen for a very long time. It's not a coincidence that the margin improved significantly for Democrats in this state. It's not a coincidence that all of a sudden in 2012, when you take a look at a state that went to Barack Obama by 3.9, goes to Biden, his vice presidential nominee at the time in 2012, by 10.1%. Barack Obama was in almost every regard a better candidate than Joe Biden, a better candidate than Hillary Clinton. Maybe not necessarily in terms of progressive policy if you look at it from that aspect, but when you take a look at it in terms of campaign rhetoric, in terms of oratory skills, in terms of rallying up a crowd, I think Joe Biden is a very good speaker. I think Joe Biden is very good at energizing. But Barack Obama was one of those candidates where it was sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of experience to go to one of their rallies or to go to one of their things, the same way it is for Donald Trump. I think that they are both, not to compare the two, but in terms of the way that they captivate the crowds, I think that they are I think that they are also very good. Both of them are very good at that. But I think that it's just notable to take a look at Virginia's ultimate swing over the past years, and to say that there isn't some type of dampened enthusiasm probably just isn't true. I understand the Republican Party can be excited about a race, but you do have to understand that you shouldn't just be looking at GOP enthusiasm. Tying Glenn Youngkin to being a mini Trump won't necessarily dampen GOP enthusiasm to the way you might think. The GOP voters were always going to vote for the GOP. You have to look amongst independents. You have to take a look amongst Democrats, people that may have been inclined or considering voting for a Republican in the past, and more so independents than any other demographic group or libertarians even. But you have this group of people that you are not necessarily considering when you talk about who's enthusiastic, who is inspired to vote for a certain candidate. So tying Glenn Youngkin to a mini Trump, I think definitely helps the Democratic Party. And it has helped over the past 4 years, but the true test will be in less than a month. But like I said as well, the GOP seems to be targeting issues such as critical race theory. Well, most of the state doesn't know what that is. When you describe it to them, sure, you can try to have some type of push-pull in terms of changing the results simply through the way you describe it. I remember that I believe one of the political PACs that is Republican founded said that critical race theory taught white students that they were the root problem of everything and that it is taught in the school system. Well, of course, 58% of the state, a majority white state, is going to be opposed to that. When you take a look at 37%, I'm sure most of those people were just trying to troll the polling company and saying, they actually know what it means. And for them to try to make this disingenuous argument about critical race theory, it is something that they pick up on. But the point is that critical race theory and other types of issues such as abortion and vaccine mandates are not going to win over voters that are already liberal, that already are vaccinated, that already support abortion. These are not things to run on as a Republican in a Democratic state. And that's why Glenn Youngkin, I think, is ultimately falling. When you saw him at the debate stage, and I think the first debate went better than the rest, I think that there was definitely a better performance for Youngkin in other debates versus the final one. But the point is that overall, looking at the numbers, there seems to be an uptick for Terry McAuliffe. I don't know entirely why. It could be related to Joe Biden. More likely than not, it's related to other issues across the state of Virginia. But looking at the uptick, it cannot be ignored, and we are less than a month away, and every single day matters from here on out for both campaigns. I'm not going to say it's not winnable for Glenn Youngkin. It absolutely is winnable. Just everything has to work correctly, and I'm sure he's heard that way more than one time this election season, and so far, it just simply hasn't been going his way. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2021 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.